Hi, everyone. Welcome to another BiotenSegri Tea Party brought to you by the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive and all volunteer production. I'm Susan Lolda Solorsino. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I'm here with my co-host, Chris Marita Clancy.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm coming from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nation and others just outside of Vancouver, Canada.
And Graham Scar is off today, and Steve is, I believe, off in Mexico today. So, today's special guest, we are very excited to have the Biotensegrity Archive's second fellow, Mike Oleon, joining us for a wild and wonderful presentation. Hi, Mike. Mike, you're muted. You got to unmute.
Hello.
And so, Mike being an artist, it's just bringing a completely different perspective for us to what's going on. He's been worked with Dorothea Blowstein, who was here, maybe is going to be back soon. Oh, there you are, Dorothea. Sorry, it's my Zoom windows. I couldn't find you. And has studied a lot of Tom Fleming stuff. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Tom Fleming's archive. And thank you, Dorothea, for maintaining that. And now Mike's like fully fledged off on his own, doing amazing things. And we're going to hear all about it today. So I'm going to propose a toast to the creative side of biotensegrity. Cheers.
Okay, so Mike, I'm such a fan of you and your work, and I've had the pleasure of building some of your kits and exploring them, and I can't wait to see what you got to share with us today. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right. Welcome all. Of course, when I make this smaller, it hides all of my buttons here. All right, there we go. Share. Got this and this and this is everyone. Nope, I know they're not, but now maybe they are. Can you see this?
Yes, we can. Thanks,
You can
Mike.
hear me?
Yeah, it's great.
Great. Okay, welcome all to the Tensegrity Seance, Death, Life, and Healthy Tension, or one tangible way in which biotensegrity speaks through us. My name is Mike Oleon. I am a puppeteer by trade turned tensegritist, and this this exploration really comes from a place of just trying to find practical applications for tensegrity. Um, and that's kind of it. Uh, is all of this wonderful science, if we're not able to help improve people's lives in a tangible way, then it's a novelty or curiosity versus a real applied science. And so as we learn more about ourselves and biotensegrity, I am curious about how it is that we can implement it in ways that are compatible with where we've been, where people are at, and yeah, and what questions we can ask moving forward. So, with that said, here we go. All right, biotensegrity. So what? Okay, so I have been hooked on tensegrity for at least 4 years. First, when I saw a Tom Fleming's model of a torso and legs walking around, and it moved with incredible lifelikeness in a way that I have seen is very difficult to achieve in most traditional forms of puppetry. And I thought, holy smokes, this could be the holy grail of uncanny movement, which is everything that I have been trying to imbue in objects. But more on that later. So, in the playing with biotensegrity informed models and learning about it, all of these things keep on raising the question of, okay, that's cool, but so what? What do we get to do with it? Here is something that appears to be an essential ingredient in biological life. It didn't even have a name until 25 years is the anniversary. Is that correct? Um, uh, yeah, we didn't even have a name for it until
I think that Fuller came up with it in the name in the 60s, but the tensegrity's 100 years or 75, depending on.
sure, but still comparatively fresh, compared to like germs, um, or even the gene. Um, so there are these claims. I mean, like the title of Graham's book or of the Ingber paper, that's, the architecture of life, the structural basis of life. That's feels very significant. And so certainly there should be all sorts of things that we can do with that, right? Um, and so my question is, why is nobody freaking out about this? I mean, clearly within this group of people, we get it. We are freaking out. But when you hand it to a normal person, they give me a puzzled look. Um, and so I've been thinking about that every day. All right, so what am I doing here? Me, a puppeteer. So my job for the last 18 years is to make things that are not alive look alive. And there's all different kinds of puppetry, and some are less focused on the aliveness of things. But in my case, the uncanny and capturing that and playing with it in all of the exciting and magical ways that it makes people feel, in the uncomfortable ways that it can make people feel. That's sort of the territory that has been given me the most interest. Um, so the theme of tension, um, and when I say tension, there is dramatic tension, of course, which is dramatic tension is a metaphor. Tension it's not a metaphor. Um, it is very practical and real, and it shows up in puppetry constantly. Um, so the uncanny is that uh, sort of visceral recognition of some aspect of life. Um, and oftentimes people refer to it as we think about the uncanny valley when something moves close to the real thing but falls short and our alarm bells go off and we're like, that's weird. That's freaking me out, man. Um, in those cases, those are so anyway, the uncanny is the lifelikeness seems directly related to tension. And when tension is in something, including be able to contract and release, that sort of pattern, we recognize on a very visceral level as like, yes, this is life. I'm looking at it. Um, Additionally, it's a communication tool between puppeteers and each other, um, or between puppeteers and the object. Specifically in the case of tabletop puppetry, which is a sort of puppetry in which you essentially have a doll. It was originally created as the bunraku style of puppetry in Japan. Um, but it's one of my favorite styles of puppetry, and I have a puppet show in here for you that we will do just after this, so I can show you some of this in action, and you can see for yourself if I'm full of shit or not. But so when working with like a doll-like puppet on a tabletop between two or three puppeteers, when we'd be rehearsing something like that, we would say that the whoever is running, whoever is on the legs can always ask the person on the head or the torso for attention. Because what happens is when the puppet is collapsed, it's not, the parts of it are not able to speak with the other parts of it. And so the head doesn't even know what the feet are doing. And they start walking around with this weird squat, and the uncanny magic just fades right out of it. And uh, yeah, so it's almost like a tin can communication tool. That like if it's Slack, the vibes literally do not pass through it. Um, so anyway, that was kind of my first introduction to tension itself. And so now I have a sort of example for you. This is a very quick and dirty puppet that I created, kind of inspired by motor proteins, which, if you ever look those up, they are the most puppety little guys you will ever see. And we are full of them. Um, so anyway, this is, I don't profess this to be great puppetry, especially my cat became very interested in it as it was happening. And so this is the version that I continued. So think of this more as an improvisation than, I know you guys aren't judging my puppetry skills, but yes, please enjoy, and hopefully you can hear the sound. Oh, all right. So that is my silly little puppet show, uh, co-starring the wolf. Um, and so in communicating what is tensegrity to folks, I am constantly dealing with words. Um, and the words help to articulate new concepts, but the more words you know, they also begin to become a barrier. And the more expert that I've become, the more difficult it is to communicate with lay people or family members or anybody who has yet to be introduced. Um, and so, even the word tension, it's a concept that we know what it feels like, but what is it? And so, I'm constantly trying to come up with what are the simplest ways that I can communicate to the average person what these things are. So here are a couple of attempts that I have found success with. So tensegrity uh, and visuals for me always help, and even better than visuals, or if I can put something in people's hands, the concepts are made so much clearer so quickly. But tensegrity is it's a self-referencing continuous tension network. And so here is an example of our continuous tension network. And it can take so many different forms. I love doing the little cat's cradle thing with it. Uh, so here's the tension network. That is suspending rigid pushing elements to create a stable and typically mobile structure. And so if we break that down even further, what is tension? Tension is pulling force. And compression is the push. And to prove how continuous the tension network is, I can pop this guy out. And if there is any doubt about pushing, you can just push something with it. All right, and so now we're gonna get a little more complicated, which I want to discuss pretension, which is essentially how much of that pull is baked into the system when it is at rest. And so the pretension will decide sort of how quickly and forcefully it is going to make its way back to its original shape. Um, and so in the human body, I think that sort of like muscle tone is really kind of the best, easiest example of this, is that we want to be able to expand in either direction at any time, between eccentric contraction or, oh shoot, was it concentric contraction? That's the other one. Um, to be able to switch between those two things. And then we want as much quality pretension baked into the system as the system will allow. And so here's where things continue to get a little bit confusing, because push can be quite gooey. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to be, we use these stick examples. But to complicate the issues is that, like, oftentimes on a cellular level, that thing that is pushing is quite quite squishy. Um, Likewise, pull itself can be incredibly stretchy, uh, meaning that it can go a long way. Um, and then how to even describe what is the opposite of stretchy? You can say inelastic, and that gets to the intuitive place of, and people generally know what that means. Um, but it's actually not a great word, because elasticity is sort of technically a different property than stretchiness, as Dorothea just recently reminded me of. Um, so all of a sudden things are getting a little tricky, and so we're getting into this place where you can feel the thing and you can get exactly what it is and start to even sort of recognize it as, like, I know that there is something very lifelike that is happening in my hands. Um, but the words are suddenly taking us both closer to the essence of it and also making it even a little bit harder. And on top of that, we have suspension versus floating. Floating is sort of the easiest. Floating is a sensation, at least in this particular case, but it also sort of makes it sound like floating within liquid, as if we might be talking about buoyancy. And of course, we're not talking about buoyancy. Um, we're talking about suspension, something being held up by a tensile force. And it's not clicking forward, but I swear there's another slide right after this one. Come on, buddy. Okay. All right, so intuition, vibes, and spookiness. Spirit, and the awareness of forces for which we do not yet have words. Okay, so the title of this, I guess sort of the impetus for this conversation came from thinking about Shakespeare's phrase, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil. And I don't know, a coil is something that is inherently pre-tensioned. That is its very nature. And so before tensegrity existed, you know, 60 years ago, uh, or whenever we discovered it, or even bothered to name it, there has been unawareness that tension, pre-tension, these fundamental qualities of tensegrity are also fundamental to the essence of life, both on a felt and experiential level and also on a mechanical level. And so I don't know, what does happen when we shuffle off this mortal coil? When we die, does the pretension release, letting the whole system go slack? Do the bones that were suspended simply rest? Does the helical spring-loaded geometry of collagen collapse without tension to maintain it? Yeah. Okay, so how did he know? And so there's other examples of this, of spooky feeling things, games that we play, folklore, phrases. Um, I was thinking, if anyone has ever played Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board, where you get like 8 or so kids to be able to like lift another kid who is stiff in rigid suspension. And I believe that what is happening there is that like there are effectively the fingers are functioning as these little tensile forces, and the body of the person in the middle, becoming stiff, becomes a compressive force that's easier to lift, and it feels like floating. All right, and so to further complicate things, and this isn't even the beginning of the complications that I am going to bring out, and I guarantee we will at least start to crawl our way just a little bit out, of the complexity by the end of this. And so on top of this, if anybody's seen The Sixth Sense, I mean, it's like a total misnomer. Like, six senses? Please, we know that there's as many as 21, at this point. Particularly, and in the fascia world, we are becoming incredibly aware of proprioception, which is the sense of our body in space and its relationship to the world around us, and also interoception, which can take oodles of forms, but that there are distinguishing features even within that. And we know that touch is separate than heat, is separate than vibrations, within the body. Uh, and what can happen is when we are aware of these things before we have the words to describe them, it gets called woo woo. And woo, I am so relieved to find out that it's not anti-Chinese racism. It's woo, like the noise ghosts make. Um, and so we have this whole group of healers. I think about massage therapists and body workers all the time. These folks who are dealing with the material qualities of our bodies and learning all sorts of stuff. And because they are manual people by their very nature, um, articulating them in a fashion that is, Western science compatible, a lot of the stuff that people have been noticing gets really dismissed. Um, and there are all sorts of frameworks, either Eastern or folky, uh, that can easily get dismissed, because we have created this very sort of mechanistic way of, well, you have to prove it, and you have to prove it in our terms, or else we will not allow this as cultural gatekeepers. And I am clicking, and if I keep clicking, it will make it to the next one. Okay, so Tensegrity has a PR problem. Maybe it's a challenge. Let's call it a challenge. Not a problem, but still. Okay, so it appears painfully complex. We come up with these words that on the inside, we know exactly what they mean, or we can understand sort of. So things like you start to hear, the more time that I've spent since I've gone to the Fascia Research Congress, is I hear, flow is essential. Um, uh, Chi, people say chi, and I associate these things with, if everything is connected, man, then, well, does it become meaningless after a certain point if it's all just there? And it makes me want to run. Um, and then additionally, we have the understanding that like it scales. It's easy enough for me to understand, okay, the bones float. The bones aren't touching each other. They're held apart and together simultaneously by a suspension network. And then we have to fractalize our way down to the cellular level. Plus, it looks like math. For me, and I'm pretty sure for other people, math evokes feelings of shame and inadequacy because I had such a difficult time in school because I didn't realize that math was actually relevant to my life and potentially enjoyable. And then on top of it all, you have to touch tensegrity structures to really get their liveliness. And so the claims become so vast to the uninitiated, they can feel overwhelming. Plus, on top of it all, when I have railed against mechanistic thinking, people have done a very good job of reminding me that mechanistic thinking is awesome. A simplified worldview has serious appeal. You either have measles or you don't. That's helpful. The bridge will either hold or it doesn't. That's great. I want to know in measurable terms whether something is going to collapse under my body or car. And compression structures, as opposed to tensile structures, are phenomenal. Stone, brick, pyramids, they are cheap, they are simple, and they last forever. Plus, magic bullets, prescription drugs, they're amazing. Why would you treat a system when you could just eat a molecule or an enzyme and change your life forever? And also, tensegrity is not necessarily the strongest way of doing things. If you have vertices that touch each other, and the vertices in a tensegrity structure, meaning the pointy ends, instead of meeting, they separate. Um, this distributes stress in a great way, but uh, you know, for example, like a TP with a membrane is going to just be certifiably stronger than uh, a tensegrity pyramid that makes more or less the same shape, but lacks a membrane and the vertices aren't touching each other. And so all of these things make a lot of sense when you are working from the outside in, when you're building something. And the thing is, tensegrity doesn't, well, it doesn't think, but is it's the system that makes sense when you are starting from a little gooey cell and working your way out, not necessarily when you're constructing something and you have to pull together, you know, 12 struts and 12 elastic bands, and it has X number of connections, and uh, it's a pain. And so now I am horribly confused. So this is a picture of some of my earliest anatomical models that I was exposed to. I'm sure if you are in the Western world, you have had a similar experience. And so, on top of all of it, in our various exercise classes or YouTube videos, we're getting all sorts of different messages from different directions. Things like don't suck in your stomach, uh, but engage your core, stack the spine, relax the back, which that one's just a store, but it's still yelling at me what to do. Relax the back, don't use your neck. Breathe from the belly, shoulders back and down. Find stillness. Love your body. Lip filler is a choice. If you don't get lip filler, you might get fired. I've just been watching a lot of television lately, and all of a sudden, everybody, no matter the age, seems to have been obligated to get their lips filled, even in period pieces. Anyway, but also it's a choice. Anyway, relax, let go of tension. And this becomes difficult. All of these different instructions that are theoretically from different contexts, they all get stored up in the mental model of self. And that's tricky. Okay, so a hands-on exercise. I guess you all are muted, and so I won't actually know if you're able to do this, but just once, all you have to do is clap. That's it. And so hopefully you clapped, and at least in my case, I am still feeling the tingle of my clap. So what is that? What is that tingle? It's still here. I can still feel it, and I can also feel it fading in my hands. And I want to know, what is that energy and where did it go? So it is Pacinian corpuscles, not one I have to say very often, which are mechanoreceptors that are sensitive to vibration and rapid pressure change, and they are distributed through connective tissue, not just the skin. I did have to look that up. I don't just know about Pacinian corpuscles. Please don't say Pacinian corpuscles to a normal person if you want them to understand anything that we are talking about today. But that tingle is the fascia talking. It is the three-dimensional vibration working its way through our body. And it is mechanical, or at least the perception of the mechanical. It's the whole tensile network ringing like a bell and then settling. So it is, oh, I forgot, there's a little video in this. It is force, and not a video, this is actually my live hands. Hello. It is force transmission that you can feel. And hopefully you're able to see this, but this thing is vibrating. You can see it jiggle. It does indeed jiggle, but, well, that's not a great example. But I can feel that when I snap and let it go, that hum that is in it, and I really just need to like get some sort of like amplifier or bell on one of these things. There's a great patent for online. Somebody made a whole instrument out of tensegrities. I think you can even play it with a bow. I'd love to make one of those at some point. But anyway, tensegrity is about being able to feel the force transmission across your body. And that, this mathy shape is just a very simplified version of a living map of if this was an organism, say like a tribble on Star Trek with just 12 bones, um, and its genetic code said your bones have to be totally straight. This is likely what it would come out like. And you can sort of see like here, there's opportunity for we got a mouth, we got an anus, we've got a dorsal fin, we've got a tummy fin, I believe is the technical term. But essentially, our tensegrity structure is a living map of our bodies. And so tension itself is a mechanical force that lives inside the body, but also it is outside of our consciousness. It's not something that the tension itself, we can add tension through electrical impulses and contraction, we can release
What I
it.
wanted to do.
But the tension itself is uh, it is outside of our consciousness. And so I have found that tensegrity is helpful for someone like me who is desperate to find a rational explanation for phenomena that feels otherworldly or spiritual. And so once you realize that the vibes are real and that they are traveling along tensile pathways, you can begin to feel where do they want to go in the body. And I say want very loosely. I'm when people talk about bodies as a design, I always cringe a little bit because I'm like, there's no design. They've adapted. It's not a design. And so want becomes a word that it describes some sort of intention, but it's really just a helpful way to think about, well, I don't know, the phenomenon and behavior that we're experiencing. It makes it anthropomorphized and relatable, you know. And so it doesn't necessarily help the average person to have a precise model of the billions of gentle dynamic connections. But tensegrity is a helpful way to have a direction to look. And so on a personal level, on a practical level, what has actually changed for me when I think about my own body as a tensile structure? And something that has particularly helped in my own personal physical practices is that when I feel chronic pain, which I've dealt with for a long time, largely induced by confusing communication with dance teachers and yoga instructors and me misunderstanding or misinterpreting or them miscommunicating. Um, and so with tensegrity, when I feel pain coming up or some of those patterns, now I stop trying to fix it in any given moment. And so I did not used to be able to work a full workday because of the back and shoulder pain. And that has largely gone. I have lowered anxiety, which I'm now realizing is all sorts of related to vagal nerve stuff, and learning that I can also that like I am allowed to touch every single part of my body. Like being able to like massage one's belly is something that I think probably nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people probably haven't done. And like reading structural release books and being able to like let a squishy ball roll around in there or be able to like manually touch it and feel the fascia spread out and release and still stay tensilely active. Um, I absolutely attribute that like I've been able to personally achieve lowered anxiety as I found out a way to somatically explore my own body for really what amounts to blockages in vibes. You know, all parts of the body, the especially I love my toes, my pinky toes and pinky fingers, which I can now move with far greater engagement. And I can tell when I am locked up, those little guys, the pinkies, they have a very hard time moving. And if I want to get everything else sort of back in action, I can sort of just be like, okay, well, what do the pinkies need? And that provides a very practical pathway. Um, Another thing is that like I would have a hard time meditating without getting preoccupied with whatever physical discomfort that I had, which is, it's hard to be mindful when you've got these alarm bells constantly ringing in your shoulders. And so, really, the biggest thing for me is that I've stopped making postural corrections the moment that pain appears, and I try and get curious instead, curious about the vibes. And so when I notice the vibes through interoception, and specifically vibes, not the heat, not touch, not pain, but just the vibes, uh, you can feel, and when you do truly let it, you can feel the body spontaneously organize. Um, it feels sometimes like there is a ghost in my pelvis. It feels like possession when you are able to just through observation then feel something float free and suddenly start swinging its way into just sort of like relaxed equilibrium. um and I don't do it all the time, but when it does happen, I'm like, oh yeah, this shit's real. Okay, so this conversation is making me very uncomfortable right now, and personally I have to tell myself that is okay. As a tensegrity communicator, I know that there is a tightrope to walk. Tensegrity for me has become helpful as a rational explanation of phenomena that feels spiritual. And I also know that that does not make every spiritual claim valid. I have this fear of the straw man, of a crystal loving hippie who's decrying vaccines and spreading measles, and I'm like, oh my gosh, am I like diving into the self-healing world, and all science is invalid, and gosh, polio is going to really come back. And my goal is not to fold spirituality into a rationalist worldview by explaining away the experience, but I have found it incredibly helpful as a new way of listening. And so this is my helpful question, is that what is this tension trying to do? Not how do I release it? Not what is causing it, but what is it doing? And I stop trying to fix it when I'm doing a good job. And oftentimes, if I do, and I will notice my desire to fix something is so fast. And so I will try and just rewind just a tiny bit to see whatever position I was in just before I made the fix and get curious about it. And so, body workers, if you are listening to this or seeing this, help me, please. Next time you or a client braces against discomfort, and I ask, wait, and see if something moves on its own. And please tell me what happens. And hopefully we can have a conversation about this right now. And if you do discover these things sort of in action, please email me. This is my email. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to know more about practical ways in which we can be applying tensegrity in our own lives. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mike. That's great. So much popped up, and I think this will be valuable not just for the manual therapists and the movement folks, but for people to share with others because it's very interesting. And pretension. I love the way that you said pretension is how much pull is baked into the system. Short, succinct, and memorable.
Oh,
So
great.
everybody in the audience now, of course, Mike finished off with a closing question here. Do you want to repeat the question for me? I didn't write it down. What is this tension trying to do? So if anybody has a response to Mike right away, I invite you to unmute, turn on your camera, raise your hand, and we'll call you up. In the meantime, Mike, I have had the great fun of building models with you in real life, actually, at the Fascia Research Congress. There's several people here that were with us then. And I know that whenever we have model makers on, the question is, oh, where can I get one of those?
Oh
So,
yeah.
will you tell us a little bit about why you developed this kit the way that you did, and a little bit more about that while we wait for people to come on out?
Oh yeah. So here, this is okay. So this is at this exact moment, this is the sort of the only kit that I have for sale, and it is part of or it is an add-on to so I've created a tensegrity dynamics of fascia course, which is directed towards particularly towards body workers, but anybody who's curious about this stuff and how it mechanically relates to and really reproduces the actual physical experience of what's happening in our own bodies and what is happening during massage, um, and all sorts of other physical activities. But anyway, that's at my website, minimokinetics.com. I'm currently getting approved for oh, what do you call it? For continuing education credits. So if you've got credits to fill, this should
Great.
cover at least three hours. But yeah. Uh, anyway, this is the latest one. I don't like plastic, but God, I do love clear acrylic.
Yeah.
It's just so it's great. This is a little snippet of our collagenous continuum that lives in our body. Um, yeah. So, oh, and right, that particular class that I've developed came from when I was at the Research Congress. Um, there was a very universal agreement that fascia communication is really hard. Is that just describing this is our interconnected cobweb system inside of our bodies, and the gristle that you cut through when you're working through a piece of meat is like really important, as a matter of fact. That's really hard to convey. And so I have tried through tensegrity to be able to make something that makes it just a little bit easier to actually put into people's hands and let them feel really what is going on inside of all of us in every moment.
Nice, nice. One of the things that is really obvious when we see you turning what I believe was a piece of string or rope into a like such a lifelike exhibit for us, or is that so much of life is movement. And then also when I see you with your tensegrity structure in your hands, the feel of it. So having these models, you can feel and see the movement.
Yeah, and it really tries to be in contrast to I've got the Barbies up there, and I've
Yeah.
got skeleton behind, where our first introduction into what movement is compressive movement, uh,
Mhm.
is purely compressive movement. And tensegrity itself is not purely tensile. It can't even exist without compression.
Yeah.
But there's a whole 50% of the how that is being completely left out of all of the conversation. And, it looks subtle, but it doesn't feel subtle.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, there's just a whole lot of rewriting uh, that has to happen. And so I'm very curious about where do we go in the meanwhile, while we are encouraging that rewriting to happen.
Yeah. Okay, great. I see Susan up. You must have a question, and then we'll have Bob.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was going to bring up exactly that point, Mike, right? It's a tenso compressional system. So another way to ask the question, or maybe it's a different question, we can explore that is, what is the tenso compressional system trying to do? And of course, it's a system of systems, we theorize, right? That are fractal, multifractal, nested, multiple scale levels. Even the question is not a simple question. But what a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Really great stuff in there. And stiff, inextensible is another word for maybe for, when
Mm.
when you've got a cable that does not stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe the engineers call that stiff, even though we struggle with that, right? Because we don't, sorry, use it that way.
Right.
Anyway, and I'm not sure spring is preloaded. So there's another question I have, but we can talk about that later. I'm going to bring Bob up. Bob, can you unmute? Let's see, and I'll bring you up. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
really,
And
thank
oh,
you.
thank you. And I really do appreciate any scientific or nomenclature correction that any more experienced person has for me. Oh my gosh, please. I thrive on that. Hit me with all of it because, you know, I, I think precision is overrated, but accuracy is very important to me. And so I would love to be as accurate in what I'm sharing as possible. Yeah, sorry.
And I believe Daniel Claude Martin would say that the struts were islanded.
Hmm.
Instead, I mean, we know Snelson would say floating.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe Daniel Claude Martin would say islanded. So
Mm.
that's another kind in the sea of tension.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, words, 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 to quote you. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for your presentation. I think we can continue this discussion that we started in New Orleans over a bowl of gumbo, and I think after a couple more bowls, we can continue on. But to try and answer your question, as you talked about, what's the purpose of the tension or the tension and compression balance? I mean, to me, the way I think of it is it's trying to allow the system or the body to, move or function in the most efficient way it can, at that particular moment based on what it's there. And I guess that one of the things that I observed during your video was the fact that when the string or whatever you were using, when you collapsed it as it was sinking down, that the lower half then couldn't move, only the top half moved, but only when you stretch and added the tension to the system could you get the upper half and lower half to move together as a functional unit. So I think that kind of that kind of illustrates what you were doing. So as a puppeteer, that might be a way that that you can explain to people what exactly is going on in the system. And then just to touch base with one more thing that you said that you're noticing in yourself is that when there's tension and that you aren't trying to release it, but you're trying to find a place where, things will soften. Well, again, as a manual therapist, what I find is most of the times I treat indirectly. So I try to do that too. I'm not trying to find the restriction and move beyond it. I'm trying to take the strain, whatever is there, out of it and let the body reconfigure that the way that it can. But I'm just trying to change the tension compressional balance to enable it, to reorganize into its most efficient state. But those are my observations, and I guess answer to things you were saying. So curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, I just have more questions about it, which is that, and so do you attribute your ability to be able to find where the strain is? Is that something like is it a mental model that you learned in anatomy? Is it supplemented by anatomy education, or is it primarily intuitive and kinesthetically trying to find your way through the forces that are present? And how do these things relate to each other? Um,
Oh, that's an easy one. It's yes, yes, and yes.
right.
No,
Just
I
learn
mean,
more.
no, I mean, I think it is. I mean, you have to kind of learn what the basics are. what my complaint about my education was, we did learn anatomy and we learned like what to feel, but we never were instructed how to feel it. What is the best way to feel it? What is the best way to engage the tissue? Which I think is a huge flaw, in the educational model. And I find like, I teach manual therapy classes, and in our students, it's the same thing, no matter what I've been finding, whether they come from the massage discipline, physical therapy discipline, other disciplines, that that's a skill that really needs to be taught, to some way. So some of it's intuitive, and some people naturally have an ability to feel things more than others. But I think that's kind of the intuition part of it. But you have to start from somewhat of a model of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to, feel underneath.
Yeah.
And I guess one other point quickly that I'd make is something you said in the beginning, is like, what is the impact of all of this on health? And I put in the chat, like when you're talking about the Pacinian corpuscles, well, they're under the category of mechanosensors. And the mechanosensors then lead to the mechanotransduction, which happens at the extracellular matrix cellular interface. And then based on that changes things into the nucleus of the cell. So then you're getting, genetic changes and, genetic expression or genetic changes in that. And so there's a whole new field you're probably not aware of. It's called mechanobiology. So what is the effect of the architecture of life, from Donald Ingber talking about mechanotransduction, now talking about, what is the effects on health and disease? And as I said, I found like 30 or 40 articles on this subject, all within the last 6 months. So this is a brand new, busting, emerging field talking about those whole concepts. So I think we're working our way towards like, what does all this do, and what does this mean, and how does this affect health and disease and life? But more to come. I think it's just starting.
That's great. Mechanobiology. Cool. Thanks.
Welcome. Good seeing you.
Likewise.
Thanks, Bob. Go ahead, George.
Oh, hi. I apologize. I didn't sit in on. We were actually teaching a class today, but I like the sense of what you're developing. And one of the comments I made, and something that I've been developing over a number of years, is the relevance of bone as fascia. And one of the things that came to light, recently, I thought it was around maybe 30% collagen. We now know there's more evidence now. It's closer to 50, 60%. And the fact is, it's a very dynamic living structure that's quite flexible and dynamic. And because it's denser, what I have found over the years is that bone is often the site of where injury is absorbed in the body, especially with impact trauma. And we've seen this, and it's something I discovered when I was teaching human dissection. It's 50 years ago now. I noticed changes in bone size, which has now been confirmed at the University of California, that when bone is injured, the fascial framework expands and it stays bigger. So if you look at your knees, your two knees are different. People think, oh, it's just developmental. No, it's actually acquired, often with injury. Can happen in the womb. Dr. Levin has confirmed that some of these strain patterns occur in the womb as well. And the other key component here, and you may or may not be aware, is that collagen is a semiconductor. So
I didn't even touch on that stuff because I'm like,
Yeah, I know, but I'll tell you, that's key to what I figured out by accident years ago. You can actually detect where it's interrupted by injury. And that is a key to find underlying injuries. And we've developed some ways to do that through our process called matrix repatterning. I'd love to invite you to one of our seminars, but this is a way we can actually trace back many of these injuries and functional disorders, concussions we work with regularly. Dr. Deutsch basically says, that this process that we developed should be the first thing done, because we can change the shape of the bones of the skull. I had one of the instructors from the local chiropractic college here in the office Wednesday, and he had never heard about bone change before. He read about it, and I got him to observe a patient before I treated them, and we did some neurological testing, noticed the shape of their skull was deformed, and I got him to palpate it, treated it, skull immediately restored to a normal shape. The neurological findings immediately changed: eye tracking, vestibular function, TMJ function. I mean, it's scary, but the thing is, it's all applied biotensegrity. I thank God for having met Dr. Stephen Levin. Now it's 1992 since we met. We were both teaching at a physical medicine conference. And when I heard what he had to say, it was like, oh my God, now the pieces of the puzzle started to fit. And gradually over time, this is the thing. And I'd say that when I hear about fascia, I really wanted people to remember those two things. Bone is fascia, as quoted by Dr. Levin. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I pointed that out to him. And he said, okay, you're right. And then he wrote about it. But the point is, we often forget that because we look at a dry bone or a skeleton and think, oh, it's a rigid strut. No, it's not in the living state. The other thing is the bioelectric change, which is measurable and reversible, correctable. So intracellular and intracellular communication can be restored. We've demonstrated that with EEG, with concussions. We can do that. We just did a presentation at the University of Guelph last week with a post-concussion autonomic dysfunction POTS patient, 6 years, unable to get out of bed, couldn't stand a shower, 12 treatments, living her life, driving, just flew out that last week for the first time in 6 years to visit her mother. She could never go independently. She used a walker before to even go just to the bathroom. So these are things that we can use and apply biotensegrity to. And we know that it's teachable because many people around the world are able to do it. And it's all thanks to Dr. Levin's insights, Dr. Ingber's science, and people like you who are clarifying the role of fascia. But, just these properties from a clinical point of view are something we need to all recognize. We've known it scientifically, but we have not put the pieces together to say, okay, guys, we can do something about this. All right. So that's all I'm saying. You guys are all doing great work, I'm sure. And if we include the bone and the bioelectric properties and restore that using, very gentle, non-invasive procedures, we can have amazing impact. That's all.
That's great. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Mike, any response to that before we move on to Paul?
Only that when you say that, it just on a visceral level freaks me out. In that, like, the speed at which certain things are possible, and like I saw this at the Fascia Congress, of like case study after case study of like kind of bananas things happening to people's bodies over such short periods of time, and how contrary that is to so much of my own mental model about how slowly things are supposed to go, or how that it can be kind of an unnerving thing to be able to hear that something that is like validated through science and real applied experience can be so transformative and is so close by.
Yeah. One thing to consider, by the way, Mike, you've heard, about stem cell therapy. Stem cell therapy, when you restore fascial integrity, you are doing stem cell therapy. You're restoring intracellular communication. Stem cells are injected in damaged areas to bypass the loss of communication and the loss of cellular alignment, but by releasing fascial tension, by restoring what we do with bone, this is really the same thing. The body knows exactly what to do with that. So it's really, I compare it to stem cell therapy, but much less potentially, insightful of, autoimmune reactions and all the issues that come along with that. But we've seen, cardiac function improving, liver function, liver enzymes normalizing. All of these things are happening at the inter and intracellular level. But if we don't recognize where it's interrupted, we're working around it. We can go deeper by really listening to the body. And people do it intuitively, manually, whatever. But there are bioelectric cues that we have been able to use and which are easily learned. And actually, I know you want to jump in, Chris, but I just want to say there is, if you're with your permission, there's a free course that I'd like to just give people today, if they want, I can give a link to it. It's a very simple,
You can hop that into the chat, but
I'll put it in the chat. Yeah.
what this really shows too, Mike, you were sharing how just through your learning and the approach to your own body, the dramatic changes you've created the environment for your body to do exactly what George was
Yeah.
saying.
And that's what yoga's about.
That
That's
is
what
self-adapt. And
all
I
of it.
also wanted to say, and this is a perfect opportunity to bring up Paul, when you were talking about the the speed at which some of these changes can happen. Earlier on, when you were giving your presentation, Paul wrote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic,
Asimov, yeah.
Yeah.
which seems like a perfect time now to invite Paul up since you're here and you're ready to speak. So go ahead. And thank you,
Thank
George.
you.
Thanks.
Mike, thank you so much for that presentation. I have a good friend who's a puppeteer, mostly giant puppets, and I really respect and love the work and love where it's taken you. Love the playfulness and the combination of your curiosity and art. So thank you for all that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple reactions in connection with the things that I'm curious about as a body worker and Tai Chi player. With your question that you suggested that we ask of ourselves of what is this tension trying to do? I think it's a wonderful question. And one of the pieces that's I think important is the word trying, because it implies it's easy as you know, I'm new to this community. I'm not as well educated on biotensegrity as many people here are, but it's easy to, even though we're not thinking, you know, in terms of, you know, whatever you might call it, ordinary mechanics, it's easy to stay in the mechanical mindset um, and not because it's so fascinating the kind of order that biotensegrity um, permits, the kind of ordering and magical kinds of behaviors that there's so much that it explains that it's easy to uh, forget we're also dealing with something that is incomprehensibly intelligent and responsive, a living system that also happens to have this advantage of being structured and moving through its biotensegral nature. There's an intelligence here. So when there's something trying to do something, it implies an intelligent response, which I think is important. And uh, it also implies the question, if each of these organisms is so brilliant, so brilliantly structured, so self-regulating, where does disease come from? Why does it have to try and fail? You know, and you know, I have hunches and suspicions, but I just think it's important to rest on those questions of like, yeah, it is trying. Why is it failing? And how is it that it can be helped to succeed? One, I don't know who it's attributed to. I think it might be James Jellis, the biodynamic cranial sacral biodynamic osteopath. Um, he said, "Health is the absence of preoccupation." Um, One of my favorite phrases. And so the trying is a kind of preoccupation. Sometimes we get preoccupied into one zone. If we're talking structurally, there's a preoccupation in terms of structuring or in terms of supporting the structural relationships in one area rather than being able to be less preoccupied with that area. Don't try so hard, in a sense. Don't try to fix it, and then allow the preoccupation to distribute those efforts throughout the whole system.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah, absolutely. And I know what's worked for me personally is that like the result oriented, you know, I think of the Barbie doll with the rock hard abs. When I'm trying to, I have that picture in my mind of, you know, the moment somebody says even the word posture, I'm like, and and so the question of like what is the thing that is getting in the way, is my own imagination of my own incomplete imagination of what the result is supposed to appear like, um, and being able to sort of like to be able to actually visualize the pathways on which these structures are traveling, and then to go from an inside out perspective of just being like, okay, just the force, just the pathway. What is what is the little journey that it's trying to go on? It's not going to fix everything, certainly. Like if I have an infection, I want antibiotics. But in the case of all of the things where my own mental model is causing that preoccupation, um, is yeah, it's just been a very helpful perspective for myself.
And I would also bring up the fact that some of the self-organization, some of the self-adaptation is not necessarily associated with quote unquote intelligence, but rather with the first principles, because we can see these patterns of self-organization in, for example, bubbles, which are fun to play with. So there is all of these unknowns as well.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that. Yeah, that it's easy to assume, just like it's easy to assume if, oh, I don't understand this spooky principle, it must be magic. It's also easy to assume capital I intelligence because
Right.
that's just what I associate with interesting phenomena. I just
Yeah.
wanted to also add that too, that I love that you're sharing the vibes thing and bravely just saying vibes. and 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 it's been, it fits with an experience that's been really growing for me in my bodywork practice, kind of accelerating in the last few years where you're probably aware in bodywork there's often and also in Tai Chi push hands there's the we use the phrase listening, um, and it's very useful because it's less analytical visual metaphor. It's useful as a metaphor, but it's become much more and more not a metaphor to me, um, in the sense that I feel as though I'm listening, just not with my ears. There's a vibratory perception that is um, just really interesting, and definitely feels related to the healing and the self knowledge process, which is healing. It's like my hands are inviting an inquiry in the other person's system, about what am I, the other person's system, I believe, is kind of silently asking itself, what am I hearing inside my echo chamber, my tensegral echo chamber? you know,
Hmm.
and I'm really curious, maybe somebody has something to say about this because I don't know the cell stuff, but there's the mechanoreceptors, the Pacinian corpuscles. There's when I hear about those things, I'm assuming that has to do with detecting tensional and compressional changes in the tissue. But I'm really curious if there's a function happening that is a little more meta than that, that is detecting and sensing resonant vibratory patterns. So, an acoustics of the tissue where it goes into tones or harmonies rather than just, oh, I'm reporting tightness here. Is there a more meta thing happening? Because that's what it feels like under my hands. I'll shut up. Thanks. Thank you so
Paul,
much for your presentation.
I
Yeah.
would recommend you go into Google Scholar and just start, throwing some words in, body, vibration, tone, pitch, whatever. And I think you'll find a lot of stuff. Jason, we're going to go over to you in just a second, but Chris, I want to make sure we get into the chat. You're going to be doing something on closed kinematic chains and bubbles and all of that.
Okay, I don't have all of that stuff set up, but what I will do is go and look for it, Susan. And Jason, I'm sorry I won't be listening to your question as closely as I'd like. But thank you, Susan.
Yeah, because that'd be great for people to put it in the chat. And also, Jan Trewartha pointed out that the event that you were doing last weekend at the Fascia Hub, Chris, and that I got to join in with, there's still access to that. So we did put that in the chat as well for anybody who wants it. Okay, so and thank you, Paul. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Susan, Chris. Hi, Mike. You in the tea party that you did a couple of years ago, I think Dorothea said that Tom said that Albert had 10 more years of design work he never got to do. So, where do you feel that gap, or what problems do you think he was, potentially referring to? And you in that tea party talked about working with physics solver and grasshopper. So can you talk about that, things that you're doing there, in the last 2 years? Can you catch us up on that? I have other questions, but I appreciate getting the chance to ask these today, and then other people have questions. So
All right, yeah, and
then-
Jason, you can always come back up too. So thank you.
yeah, I don't want to monopolize the time because I always have 100 questions for people.
They're always really good questions. Um, that yes, that is, oh boy, that's a big talk. I will try and sort of narrow it down to the essentials. Um, so so Althea, though, who I don't have her because she's in Berlin. I do have her brother Pipo, he's sort of hanging dead right here. Um, was really an attempt to try and take things to, I don't think necessarily the level that Tom was going into, in part because I didn't understand where he was at. But we do know through uh, a lot of the other models that he was working on, we can sort of start to glean some of the directions that he was going into, which include really sort of like curved morphology, instead of just linear struts. Seemed very important. You can see that on the rib cage, especially that he made, that's on the Intention Designs archive, uh, and and there is as I've sort of started to gather, is that there's really kind of at minimum two sort of tensegrities that I think can be really represented. There's the sort of like endotensegrity and the exotensegrity. Um, there's the surfaces of the skin and the outer structure that's actually sort of like pulling everything away. And then there is the bone stuff, or is like, we often talk about, sort of in the earliest definitions of, I mean, not earliest definitions, but like in the sort of geodesic, let me try and switch my view, which I do by this, um, is that these exterior um, forces are pulling sort of everything in, um, so that even when there's struts in place, we're talking about the surface. But when you look at, like a knee or something, or not a knee, but like a shin or an arm, or especially in like appendages, where in the center of the structure is the more rigid element of it.
Is this where he was doing tensegrity weaves encasing a joint? Because that, that.
Um, yes, yes, this is exactly, I think, the kind of level that he was, that sort of encasing, um, that he was doing. And so like he's got these other Alberts, or these other humanoids that look, some of them are more skeletal, but we also have this model that he's made where its legs are these like big, thick, uh, these sort of like thick, prismatic kind of structures on the outside. So I think that really sort of he was, I mean, gosh, it's so funny because
Hey,
tensegrity
Mike,
becomes, yes.
you move the one that's behind so that it's easier to see. Yeah, thanks.
Um, yeah, so he would be modeling things where it's like it's the outside, you know, you can see this interior is, where's the camera? Camera,
Good.
hello.
That's
It's
good.
totally hollow through here. But like clearly our bone, so like, you know, how does this represent where is this in a thigh? And you know, this is, I think, sort of like expanded into sort of kind of like the weird liminal space of like both the outside and the inside being represented. Um, so I think he was on a lot of different paths
Yeah.
simultaneously.
Yeah, he
Uh,
talked about the myofascial wrappings acting like a helical tensegrity mast.
mhm.
And he was always, I think, making the point that tensegrity and biology are not, homologous, or they are different domains, and it provides a simile, not a metaphor. Um, but I think, that structure you were talking about is where he would build these tensegrity sheets and yeah, wrap them around. And there are, some cool videos on his website of of taking that and wrapping it around, and it become, like putting it over a joint, and seeing the articulation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And
have you engaged with him on the bistable lever,
I'm not
the
sure if
fulcrum?
Dorothea wants to come up or not, but or if she's even able. But if you would like to, Dorothea, we would love to hear from you. So Dorothea runs Tom Fleming's archive, but I'm not sure if she's able to come up. So we'll give her a moment to see.
Mike, do your models include that bistable that uh, um, tensegrity fulcrum in that Tom demonstrates?
I do know, I know exactly the one that you're talking about. Have I made that exact one? I have sort of a, you're talking about the little flat. Let me see if I can.
Yes, but he then also, shows it in, you know, a an a much more complex tensegrity structure.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so
that's
you
actually
can
potentially an
actually
easy
see
one.
the flipping of it.
Yeah, I think he's talking about one that flips, Mike. And Jason, I'm trying to remember where I know that, well, on the Flemings website, I believe that
Yeah,
Dorothy, you can tell us that there's a video of that there. Is that right?
I,
Yeah. Well, here, I
I'm
might be able
happy to
to.
put it in the chat while Dorothea answers.
Oh,
Thanks,
great.
Jason.
And I can also potentially assemble the one that I believe you're referencing, if I can find the working cap. This is what
Dorothy,
always happens. I have to.
And meanwhile, we've got Dorothea up on screen.
Oh,
You can't
great.
see that, but I know, Dorothea, you've got a lot to, I mean, you know more about Tom than most people on his work. So why don't you share with us?
Well, I'm just so glad to have Mike to help build on Tom's legacy, and Tom's brothers are very happy in supporting us. One exciting thing was that Tom always had design notebooks where he wrote down all his ideas and made sketches, and one of Tom's brothers has digitized a bunch of those. And so we have many hundreds of pages of information that mixes all kinds of stuff, and Jason is valiantly going to try to provide some sort of indexing of that, and then we can maybe add all of that to the Tom Fleming's archive. And yeah, this bistable, I I think it'd be very interesting to look into that. And Tom had actually written a little more information about that and said, please keep this confidential for now. It may have intellectual property implications. And I think by now enough time has passed and Tom is no longer with us that I can make that public on the Tom Fleming's archive, and maybe we can collectively start discussion of these bistable tensegrity structures. I know Steve Levin is a huge fan of the Jacob's ladder, and this is sort of an analogy to that.
Exactly. It's a play on the Jacob's ladder. Thank you.
Well,
That's
and
what I was going
Mike,
to say.
even the bigger model that you had is in effect bistable because you can change it from one major organization to another, but you can't do it all at once. If you make a movement, if you slide it along the tension, um, along the cable too quickly, it'll pop back to the organization that it was in. But if you ease them, and it takes a long time, you can go from one shape to the other. And that, in effect, is bistable, not the same fast switch that maybe Jason was talking about, but certainly that structure wants to be in one organization or wants. There's that word again. But it will tend to self-organize either this way, or I can remember being with you at the Fascia Congress, Mike, and having to make all these little tiny movements throughout. And then suddenly this same combination of struts and cables stayed in a different.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and those are that particular bistability, which you can see this sort of more. This is the octahedron, and kind of its what I've now realized is it's is a of the two stabilities that it has. There's a resting state that it has and a high energy state that it has, and so this is more of when the vertices are closer to each other, you can sort of see visually there's a lot more slack in each one of the lines. They're not as tensed. And then when it is sort of activated, uh, it is, you can sort of pop these out. And that sliding that happens on the model that you have is like largely in part because the grip just isn't very strong on them. This new version really sort of like stays latched, but when you expand the vertices, it's still, this is really happy to be here, and it's more lively and it responds across the system more. But you can also feel that there is, and it vibrate. I mean, like the vibration is just the really exciting part to me. But there is more stress being put on the overall system. It's like activate. It's the energy that one is expending to keep a muscle flexed. And so that's where pretension comes in, is that if we were to have this shape, but um, and they've figured out that like in our earlier life, collagen grows on like a tendon, and then later in life it adds onto the tendon um, extra collagenous strands. And so if we were to want to make this stronger, I could be printing out more material that essentially has more potential energy inside of the system and wouldn't wear out as much as the thinner one would that's being placed under greater stress in this particular state.
Cool. Cool. That makes me think of um, Mariana Barreto with a simple struts and elastic band model where the elastic bands were kind of soggy. And then she just puts, was it Mariana or was it Marin? I can't remember. They just put extra elastics on and then it's back again. But go ahead, Diane. Thank you, Dorothea. And I notice we're getting close to an hour and a half. So let's move on to Diane.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Mike, for this marvelous presentation. Several things to comment on. I love your little puppet. Um, uh, and I would like to see it again and again because I loved watching it explore its space and its surface. And he sometimes explores from his feet and sometimes some other part. And there was so much there to say to tell us more about the body's ability to get from here to there, and also it's quite funny. So I
Hmm.
would really love to see it again. It's a very, very lovely piece of work. Thank you. Yes, there. And
Hmm.
oh, it's just a, a great example of how we manage our bodies when we are paying attention
Hmm.
and doing things that and and allowing them to find their patterns, find themselves. So this is a lovely example of that.
Thank you.
And you're very welcome. And this new model that you've been showing the last few minutes as well, that is now for sale. I would very much like to buy one of those. It takes you into another realm from the TI COSA that we work a lot with. And I like this one better because it it reminds us about the plasticity and elasticity of the body and what it's capable of doing when it wants to,
Hmm.
when it needs to. Um, and the idea of the of being curious, I think, is another important, very important idea, because we all bump into things or we all hurt something or whatever, and when they have to say, "Oh, okay, this is not some mechanical project. This is this is an opportunity to learn about this issue that has happened. What can
Hmm.
I do here? What can I do? What makes this go or not go?" And so this curiosity is really an important way of learning to manage issues, things that happen to your body. And then this idea of how what happens to our tension when we die. And of course, Rudolf Laban was looking at this back and writing about it back in the 1920s, when he used the term cohesive tension that told him that he was looking at a body that was in total liveliness at all times.
Mm.
Total liveliness. So your puppet is part of that piece in a sense, not human, but also very human. So I love that. And
Cohesive tension. That's great.
yeah, yeah, cohesive tension. Yes. In it's an art in an article that Irmgard Bertiniev wrote called Space, Effort, and the Brain in a magazine called Main Currents in Modern Thought, which I have a piece that's so marked up you can hardly read it, but it's very important. She writes about his work, and that's the first time I see the words cohesive tension, and he links that to Fuller in this article.
Hmm.
Anyway, thank you very much. It's just
Cool.
a delight to be here with you.
Oh yeah, thanks, Diane. That's great.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, so we are maybe, do you want to say something, Mike? Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just making a weird face.
Okay. We're coming towards the end of the tea party, or at least the YouTube live. We often stay on for an after party afterwards. Don't know if you have time, Susan.
A few minutes, yeah.
Couple of minutes. Good, because I have another question for Mike, which I
And
can.
if you're watching on YouTube, go to the biotensegrityarchive.org website, get on the email list, make a donation if you're inspired to, but get on the email list and you'll get our newsletter, and then you'll be able to join us here on Zoom for the tea parties.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And did the Minimo Kinetics website get onto the YouTube as well? Because Mike's got this workshop coming up that people might be interested in, or also buying the models. But of course, we always like to close with a toast. I invite our Zoom audience to open up their cameras if they don't mind being on YouTube. And then I will ask you, Mike, if you would please honor us with a closing toast.
Oh, sure. Right. My toast would be to opening ourselves up to the uncomfortable experiences and questions that might lead to transformations that we cannot yet even imagine.
Good.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Getting curious about the uncomfortable. I love it, Mike. Okay,
Great.
let's wait for Susan to turn off the YouTube live.
Bye, YouTube.
Bye, YouTube. Everything's in a different place from where it used to be. Let's see.
Yeah, things are changing. Hey, great, Mike. Thank you.